So again, this is the kickoff to that classification study that I felt like I've been talking about since I started 16 years ago. But it's not, but this is a start. This is a collaborative effort between ACE and the district. We have joint authority to make decisions on all the data points that affect the outcome of the study and stuff like that, so I want to keep that in mind for everybody. I don't want to say a whole bunch. I want to introduce you to Alyssa and Charles. They're from Coffin Associates, and they're the ones who are going to be conducting the study for us. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Alyssa.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming in. Before we start, just a disclosure. I'm sure you can see all of the equipment over there, but this session is being recorded, video and audio. So if you have questions, we have a microphone here that we're going to pass around, and please feel free to ask questions at any time through the presentation. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Alyssa, and this is Charles, and we're here from Coffin Associates. So the presentation today that we're going to go through, we're going to talk about the classification and compensation study process, as well as talk about your role in the process and where employees will be involved and engaged in the process. To start off with, just a little bit about Coffin Associates. We've been around since 1984 conducting classification compensation studies as well as other human resources services. Our primary clientele is public sector agencies, so a lot of cities, counties, special districts, including other community college districts and school districts, as well as other types of agencies like water, wastewater agencies. So really the public sector is our client base. In terms of, I guess the next slide, why we are here. So we're here to conduct a classification and compensation study. And as I understand it, it's been a while since the district has gone through this process. So we're very excited to be here to work in collaboration with the district on this project. There is a relationship between classification and compensation. So the first part of the study will focus on classification, and the purpose of that is understanding the positions and the work that's being performed by the employees. The second phase of the study will be the compensation study, and that is where we will look at the external market in terms of comparing salary and benefits to the labor market, and then as well as an internal look in terms of internal equity within the district. This study is a snapshot in time, so I think it's been about 20 years since the last study was done, so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of changes and updates that need to happen to the classification descriptions, but it is a snapshot in time. So we're here at this point, we want to capture the work that is being performed and document that. Understanding that there might be some changes going on as we speak, so no agency is static. There's always changes going on, so we do want to incorporate some of those changes as well that might be going on. In terms of stakeholder involvement, so our process and our approach at Coffin Associates with any engagement that we undertake is to make it as collaborative and inclusive as possible. So we want to make sure that all stakeholders are involved, including employees, management, human resources, the committee, the Joint Labor Management Committee, and make sure that we're all involved in the process. And as we go through the presentation, we'll talk about where employee involvement will come into play. So the purpose of the study is to ensure that the classification descriptions are up to date and current. And again, there's probably been a lot of changes in the last 20 years that we should incorporate in the descriptions. Obviously, technology has changed, which has changed the way work is done. So we want to make sure that that is reflected in the classification descriptions. And in addition to that, what we're going to be looking at is ensuring legal compliance. So there's things like the Fair Labor Standards Act, so that is to determine whether positions are exempt or non-exempt, so whether they're eligible or not eligible for overtime or eligible for overtime. Also, we want to make sure that we're in compliance with American with Disabilities Act to ensure that what we capture in the class description gives a good sense for anyone who's reading it, what the physical demands and environmental conditions are associated with that position. With that, once we have the classification descriptions and the structure set up and updated, it really will help with other human resources processes, like recruitment processes. So if an applicant were to look at the class description, they would know what the work is that is required of them, as well as the minimum qualifications. So it does give a good sense, and it'll enhance the recruitment process. In addition, what we're hoping for this classification structure and the new descriptions to do is also enhance the career development and training processes. So it will help for employees to understand, well, what would I need to do to, develop or move up within their careers. So it does give a sense of career ladders or career growth opportunities, and also training opportunities. Finally, or I guess another aspect of this is also in terms of performance management. So having an updated class description will give employees and their supervisors and management an understanding of the work being performed and what is expected of employees. And so it'll also help supervisors and managers and employees to kind of set those next goals of what they would need to do in terms of to develop themselves or other areas that they might be interested in. And then finally, once we have the classification structure in place, it does set the base for a compensation system. So in order to set compensation, we first need to understand the work being performed. In terms of the classification study, so just a few things I want to go through, just in terms of terminology. So a lot of times you'll hear the word classification and position. Classification is the broader description of the work being performed, and positions are more specific to the individual employee. So for example, a classification might be administrative assistant, and you might have multiple positions within that broader classification. So position would really describe that particular employee's work. Classification and compensation, again, we look at it as two separate systems but connected. So classification describes the work, and compensation is the value of that work in terms of salary and benefits. Position Description Questionnaire, or PDQ form, that's what we will be going through and reviewing today, how to fill out that form. But what that form documents, it'll ask you a series of questions, and it will help us to have documentation and gain a better understanding of your work. So it's just a data collection tool that we use. And then finally, the desk audits, they're also called job audits. We call them interviews. Will be scheduled with employees following the PDQ completion process. So the purpose of the interviews really is for us, it's another data collection tool that we use. We invite employees. You'll have an option on the form to select whether or not you want an individual interview, whether or not you want to participate as a group with others in the same classification, or you could also select not to be interviewed. The purpose of the interviews really is just another way for us to gain some clarification if we have questions about the information that you put in the PDQ form. And it's also another way for employees to communicate what they do. So oftentimes we do find that, it is challenging to sit down and document everything that you do. So having that conversation really does elicit some additional information and clarification. So the study process starts off with a kickoff meeting, an initial meeting with the project team. Next, we have these orientation sessions, which you're at today. So we'll be conducting the orientation sessions were held yesterday as well as today. And in addition, for those who were not able to come, we're going to have it available online as a video. The next step will be for employees and supervisors and managers to complete the PDQ form. And so that form, we'll go through on how to fill that form out in the next few slides. And then following that, we'll have the employee interviews and supervisor and manager interviews as well. That'll be in a few months. We have a timeline and a couple of slides. And then from there, what we do is once we have all of the data gathered, we go back to our offices, we go through all of the information, we develop our classification concepts, so looking at leveling, kind of classification series, job families, and put together a structure, and from there develop recommendations of allocation of individuals into that structure. And at the same time, we're also going to be working on developing those descriptions. So that does take about 6 to 8 weeks to actually develop those descriptions. From there, once those descriptions are developed, we'll send them back to the district as in a draft form. And those will then be disseminated back to employees, supervisors, and managers for review. So as an employee, you'll get a chance to review the description for your classification and provide us feedback in terms of whether or not there are things in there that shouldn't be in there or things that should be added. So we just want to make sure that you have a chance to look at those descriptions in draft form. When we do collect the information through the PDQ form and interviews, what we do is we do ultimately make a recommendation in terms of each employee and their classification title. What we do is we look at the position, what we call the whole position. So we look at everything from the qualifications, so the education, training, certifications, and experience, the minimum qualifications to do the work, the overall duties performed, as well as these other factors like problem solving, independence of action, responsibility, contact internally and externally, and the purpose of those contacts, as well as including working conditions and physical demands. So we look at the position holistically when we develop our recommendations. In terms of just setting some expectations, so we want to make sure that you understand that we are not here to evaluate your performance. So the form isn't meant to determine whether or not you are performing well or not performing well in your position. We really are here just to understand the work being performed. This is also not a staffing study, so we're not here to determine staffing levels, again, just to focus on the work that's being performed. The form itself, as we go through it, the last page, there's a last page, and that last page is where we have supervisors and managers comment on the content that the employee put in the form. So what you actually fill out in the form, your supervisor or manager is not going to change. That information that you put in there will be your information. And then again, just to reiterate, classification descriptions, when they're written, are general. They are reflective to reflect the broader work that's being performed, including if there's multiple positions within there. So sometimes when class descriptions come back, employees see it, and it might not capture everything that was put in the PDQ form, but for the most part, what we want to do is ensure that it is reflective of the work being performed generally. And then we do encourage you, it will take probably about 2 to 3 hours, 2 hours usually, to fill out the form. We encourage you to do that during work hours. So working with your supervisor to allocate that time to fill this form out during work hours. So in terms of a proposed timeline, we have that here. Again, we're doing the orientations today, and we did some yesterday. We'll also have the PDQ forms available for you. There are 2 options. One is a manual form, so you could print it out and fill it out by hand if you prefer. The other option is to do it electronically. So you can use it as work on it, type on it. We do ask that you send your completed PDQ to your immediate supervisor by February 24th. And then after that, your supervisor will review it and comment on the last page, and then there will be a management review as well. And then those will be sent back to Human Resources, and then once we get it, we'll review all the PDQ forms, put together an interview schedule based on how employees selected, how they wanted to be interviewed. And then we're hoping to get back here the week of April 7th to do in-person interviews with employees and supervisors. And then mid-July, we're hoping to have the draft class descriptions developed and back to the district. So the PDQ, oh, yes?
So after, when you give them the draft, sorry.
Gotta give this to you. Passes on that.
Once you've given the draft class descriptions to the district, do you, and I'm looking at Maisha, does the district have a timeline that they can share with us for that part going on? Their response time?
So usually, once we send those back, and for employee review is usually about 2 weeks for employees to have the opportunity to review the draft descriptions. So, but we're flexible on that, and we'll work with the district in establishing that timeline or that time frame. Any other questions? Oh, there's a question right here. Oh, sorry,
Oh, that's okay, I can do it. Once you have the draft positions, how much time is normally in between a draft becoming like a reality and going into effect as far as for like recruiting purposes or, you know, if there's changes in your job, about how long does that take? I mean, is like start to finish this like a year process, a 2-year process? Any estimates?
Sure. So that's a good question. In terms of implementation, so once we have the draft descriptions developed, and then we go through the employee and supervisor review. So again, we give employees, it's usually about 2 weeks it takes to review the descriptions, provide us feedback and comments, questions back. And then from there, we'll go ahead and, on our end, work through those comments, answer those questions, and update the descriptions. And then we'll send those back to the district. And then from there, it will be up to the district in terms of timeline for implementation.
So it's really undetermined, because so it could take a year to 2 if the district is like trying to work with the union or figure things out or whatever, so.
For
you
the,
can only project your part.
yes, correct.
All the questions are on this side.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Brad Booth. I'm your labor attorney rep. But anyway, an answer to your question is they have a process that they're going to be working with, but then that process then goes over to the Joint Labor Management Committee. What we've done is a little different than what other districts who have done a reclassification do, in the sense that HR isn't solely responsible for everything that's happening. We've got a Joint Labor Management Committee between ACE and HR that will be reviewing everything. We hope that that will expedite the process so that implementation can be sooner rather than later. But they're right, they're going to finish their process, they're going to provide us with a document or whatever their results are. Then that Joint Labor Management Committee will have to work with that, whatever it is, make decisions that they feel need to be made, whether it's just adopt it and give it to you or make changes. At some point, though, ACE will be presenting it to you all to vote yes or no on the reorganization before it occurs. Okay? Does that help?
That makes sense.
Okay.
Where does compensation come in that process?
It comes in towards the end. It'll be part of it, but to be honest with you, we're not looking at this as a classification process. I mean, a salary process. We're really more interested in the classification aspect of it, making sure everybody's aligned properly, not necessarily comparing our salaries with salaries from other areas, okay? So don't expect much changes, this is me speaking alone now, on the salary aspect, but there may be. You know, we don't know. Depends on what they give us, okay?
Other questions?
Great. Well, thank you. So when you access the form, what you'll find is the first page is just some instructions. Again, it's just a summary of what we're going to be covering today as we walk through each of the sections. The actual first page of the form where you start to fill it out, there will be a box at the top where it will ask for your information, your name, how long you've been with the agency, your title, contact information. And then right under that will be the option to select how you would like to be interviewed. Again, you can select an individual interview, so that would be a one-on-one interview, or you could select to be part of a group if you work with other individuals that do similar work and you're in the same classification. You can feel free to participate in a group interview. And then the third option is if you choose not to be interviewed. There is that option. We do look at every PDQ form, even for those individuals that select not to be interviewed. And sometimes questions come up for us, and we will we might choose or invite you to participate in the interview if there's something in the form that we feel we would need to follow up on.
Let me just say, there is no reason not to do an interview, all right? If you're being asked to do an interview, do the interview. Don't decline the interview, because it'll only be additive to the process.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. And that's exactly what the primary purpose of the interview is, just to get some richness around the information that we get from the form. So, as you fill out the form, there's a lot of information that's there, but, it's written, it's in a, a certain format, and this allows us to look at that information. If we have questions, get clarification around it, allow you the opportunity to provide some richness around your job, so that we make sure that we accurately capture everything. That's the primary purpose, is just to make sure that at the end of the day, we've got the right information, that you feel that you've have been given the the opportunity to provide complete and full information about your job, so that we can move forward and not come back later with something that's incomplete or incorrect.
Yes. And also, I didn't mention this, but in terms of actually filling out the form, we do also, if you work with other individuals, again, that do similar work and you're in the same classification, you can work together to fill out the form. So you could do it jointly as well. And again, the form will be available as you can fill it out manually or by hand or electronically. So the first section of the form is actually just to give us a broad overview of what you do. We ask that you limit it to about 2 to 3 sentences, and there will be opportunity later in the form to go into more detail about your job duties, but this at least gives us an overall sense of the purpose of your position. And so that's what section 1 is. Section 2 gives us organizational context of your position. So here we ask for your supervisor's name and title, as well as others that report to your same supervisor. We also go through and ask about how your work priorities are set. So sometimes work priorities are set by yourself. They might be dictated externally. You might be working on a project, and so that timeline might already be established by the project team leader. It might be set by your supervisor. So we ask that you indicate how your work priorities are established. Also, work decisions. So here we're looking for examples of decisions that you make independently within stated policies and procedures, but that you can make on your own. So sometimes that's day-to-day decisions pertaining to your specific work. And so we ask that you give some examples of the decisions that you make on your own. The next question is actually related to decision making as well, but this one focuses on decisions that you might refer either to your supervisor, maybe it might be a colleague in another department. So again, just getting a sense of the type of decisions that you might defer to someone else to decide or make that final decision. And then guidance. Guidance here, we're looking for things that you use in order to guide your work and also guide the decisions that you make. So that guidance might be and establish policies and procedures. It might be from your supervisor or a mentor that you have, or it might be, regulatory requirements that you have to comply with. So here we're looking for the type of guidance that you use in terms of completing your work and the work that you do. And then the last is performance or review of work. Here, we're not looking for when your actual performance evaluation is completed, but more about how often is your work reviewed? Is it on a day-to-day basis, your supervisor's checking in with you, or is it more of, you're given an assignment and you determine the steps to take, and then your work is reviewed upon completion of that assignment? So here, we're just trying to get a sense of how often you check in with your supervisor or how often your work is reviewed. The next few sections, so here, supervision under 3, we're interested in the type of supervision that you exercise. So you might have staff that report to you. Here, we ask that you list the staff that report to you, and then the type of supervision that you exercise. So there's going to be a checkbox where you can check off, like hiring or performance evaluation. Sometimes you might not actually be doing that, but you might be recommending. So there's 2 options. There's 2 columns. One will be approve and one will be recommend. And so you can select what applies to you in terms of supervision that you exercise. In terms of equipment, so here we're looking for the type of equipment that you use in order for you to perform your work. If you work in an office, it might just be office equipment, but if you work out in the field, you might be using hand tools or power tools. So we ask that you list that equipment under Section 4. Section 5 is about contacts. So here we're looking for internal as well as external contacts that you have, or you're in communication with, or you work with. It can be on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis. We ask you to indicate the frequency of those contacts. And the contacts that we're looking at isn't necessarily the person that you work with on every day sitting next to you. What we want to know is contacts that you might work with from another department or even external to the district. And then also with the contacts, we also ask about the purpose of those contacts. So is it to just exchange factual information? Is it to interpret policies and procedures? Is it to negotiate contracts? So the purpose of the contacts also gives us some context of your position. And then the last section on this slide is about budget. So the budget the monetary value that you are responsible for, and as well as what that responsibility entails. Does it mean monitoring expenditures, or it could be actually working on developing the budget? So forecasting maybe might be involved as well. So just a description of what your responsibility is associated with the budget. So Section 7 of the form, this is where we really get into the meat of what you do. So here we ask about the description of the work. So there's going to be a table where you're going to list your duties. This is where it probably takes the most amount of time to fill out the form, because I know it can be challenging to sit down and write down everything that you do. We do ask that you look at it in an annual context, so look at it over like a year-long period, because there might be some things that you do once a year, but it might be very highly critical to your work. So we want you to look at it in a whole year in terms of the duration of time. We do ask if you could prioritize your work. So the work that you spend the most time on would be 1, job duty 1, 2, and then going down to the least frequent amount of time that you spend on that duty. In terms of percentage of time, again, we ask that it add up to 100%. How we usually might help you in terms of getting to that 100% is to think about it again in an annual basis. So there is about 2,080 hours in a work year. So if you could allocate hours to that job duty and then divide it by 2,080, or if you have a good sense of, yes, overall annually, this takes about 10% of my time, you can fill it in that way. And then again, frequency is whether you do that task several times a day. You might just do it once a year. You might do it monthly. We ask that you indicate the frequency. And then as well as the importance. So high importance would be if that duty were taken away, it would significantly change your job. Low importance would be that duty could go away, but it doesn't really impact my work too much. So another position could possibly do that work, and my job wouldn't change very much. So again, we ask that you rank your importance. And in terms of the form itself, if you run out of space, you can always attach another sheet in the duties. And anywhere in the form, actually, if you run out of space on the form, you can attach additional sheets. But it should allow you to add as many duty statements as you would like.
On the importance part, just to clarify, that's the importance of that task to the person's position, not the importance of that work to the office.
To the position, yes.
Okay.
Yes. So once we go through the job duties, the next sections are, Section 8 actually asks about what you consider to be the most complex and difficult duties of your position. So it gives us a sense of the complexity of the work being performed from your perspective. And then Section 9 is changes in responsibilities. So if you've had changes in the last, say, 2 years, we ask that you indicate that there. In addition, if you anticipate that there might be changes coming up in the next couple of months, you can also indicate that there as well. And again, a lot of this information we're going to be following up in the interview, so there'll be opportunity to expand during the interviews and clarify some of these things. The next few sections, 10, 11, and 12, just give us a sense of the context that you do your work or the environment that you perform your work in. So we'll ask questions related to sensory demands as well as physical demands and environmental conditions. And again, most of this is related to ADA compliance. Sections 13 and 14 ask about the minimum qualifications of your position, so the knowledge and abilities as well as the education, experience, any special licenses or certifications required to perform the work. In terms of these sections, what is good, and even when you're doing the duties, if you wanted to use your current class description that exists sort of as a basis, again, it's been about 20 years since the last study, but at least it'll give you a sense of what the current requirements are, the current duties are, and from there you can build and modify to fill out these sections. And then the last page, so that up to that section is where employees will fill out the form. Once that's completed, it'll go to your supervisor for review. And again, supervisors and managers will not be changing the content that you put in the form. There is an opportunity for them to answer a few questions at the end of the form on the last page to, what their sense of the minimum qualifications are, what they feel are the most important duties and responsibilities of the position, as well as whether they agree or disagree with what the employee put in the form. And so there'll be an opportunity there for supervisors to have that feedback and provide that feedback. So any questions on the classification study or the PDQ process? Yes.
Mine's kind of maybe a little bit of a historical perspective. I worked for the district over 27 years, so I was here during the last one.
Okay.
And there's a number of people in this room that were also there. And of course, my memory's not as good as it could be about it, but it seems to me what happened was the district had a whole bunch of job descriptions that weren't in the same level. And from what I understood, one of the main reasons they did this the classification study was because they wanted to facilitate the bumping process when people are laid off. And so if you have too many classifications, an employee gets laid off, there's no other position in their same classification they can bump into if they have seniority. They just lose their job. So what seemed to happen is then all of a sudden everything became almost totally generic to go completely the opposite direction. So, for example, say you have a senior administrative assistant that's a level 52. You know, you could have lots of them in the district, but they took away anything specific. For example, I work in the international office, and we have a position that is a 52, but it requires very specific, detailed knowledge of federal immigration regulations. We have to report to the Department of Homeland Security, work on their immigration database, have fingerprint screening, and it goes on and on and on. What's required to have the right knowledge base to do the job. But somebody that's a senior admin anywhere could bump our immigration advisor out of their job. And we'd have somebody with no knowledge, no experience to be dealing with that. So, of course, that's a concern, and I don't know if there'll be some situations where, like, they'll say, okay, wait, that's a senior admin that really shouldn't be in the general bumping realm. So that's just something that I've observed.
Great. So,
Mary had a question.
Yeah, I didn't know if she was going to answer or address that before I asked my question.
I don't think there's anything to address. I think we put the information down as best we can. We leave it to the consultants. The consultants will sort of call all of that information and to help us determine if that's the right classification for the duties that are performed, or if they were going to make a recommendation that it should be something different, or if whatever those things be. We won't know until we get the data. So at this point, we're really just looking to get the data to figure out where we are with what we're doing. Does that make sense for right now?
Yeah, that's fine for now.
I just have a quick question.
Sure.
After the supervisor provides their comments and questions, does the employee get to see those comments and questions before it moves on, or is that confidential to the supervisor and everyone else?
So that's a good question. That's a question we often get. So usually, just before timing a process, it usually will come to us. If there is anything in there based on the supervisor comments that, is a discrepancy, or, they have comments that they might disagree about certain parts of the form filled out by the employee, we would have that follow-up conversation during the interview. But eventually, once the process is done, I believe that there will be a chance for employees to have access to their completed PDQ form with the supervisor comments. Oh, sorry, there's a question.
Hi, I'm fairly new to the district, and I'm not, you can't hear me? Oh, can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
I'm fairly new to the district, and I'm not familiar with the term bumping. So I don't know if that question is for you or for Chris, but could you clarify, explain bumping? Thank you.
Brad, do you want to just do that real fast?
When the district determines there's a lack of work or a lack of funds for a particular position, then they're authorized by law to institute a layoff. Layoff in this district is the number of hours worked in your classification. So they sit down, they come up with a list of people in every classification that's impacted by the layoff. It's called a seniority list. The most senior person, the least senior person, ultimately the least senior person will be the person who's laid off. The issue that she's raising has to do with bumping rights, which means you have a right to go from your position if it became eliminated to another lower level position, or to another position within your classification that you have more seniority than a person. Pardon me? Yes.
What was it? Or no?
Well, I mean, So, in other words, what she said was that you previously worked in. So if you're going to a different classification, it's a classification that you have status in. Really, this is an hour or two long conversation in order to fully understand what we're talking about. If in fact the district ever gets into that mode where they're laying off because of a lack of funds, I guarantee you'll understand it. I'm not sure you need to understand more than it's seniority based. The more senior you are, the less likely you are to be laid off.
Can I just have one follow-up question for you on the bumping? When the bumping process happened one time and my job was eliminated, I had the most seniority in my category, and I wasn't given any choice of what jobs that were below me in the same category I would bump into. The way the district did it at the time was they made a list of seniority, and the most senior person bumped whoever had the least amount of seniority at the district. So I was just picked and placed anywhere when there was a number of jobs below me that could have been an option. I was very fortunate, I was blessed, and I got a wonderful opportunity, but it may not have happened that way. So I just, in this classification process, I don't know if they'll be rethinking about, is there any choice in the people, in how the bumping goes?
The classification process has nothing to do with the issue of layoffs. Layoffs is a bargainable issue that is dealt with at the table. Right now, I believe the way the contract states is you go to a vacant position if there is one. The last time we were involved in a layoff, we took all the vacant positions, we took them by seniority. The most senior person got the first pick, the second senior got the next pick. It all depends on how you're impacted by it. If there's no vacant positions, then what happens is you go to the least senior person and you bump them out. It's not real complicated, but it's not a happy time for anybody, okay? So when it ends up, if you have a job, you're better off than the person who went out the door.
So it changed since 2003 where people have a choice, because I had no choice in 2003.
It depends on the circumstances.
Yeah, I kind of think we're losing track. We need to really focus on the classification study. Those other issues you may want to take up directly with your union representatives, but I think right now we really need to focus on the process for the classification study.
Okay, thank you. So the second phase of the study, once we have the classification study completed and we understand the work being performed by the various classifications at the district, is to then embark on the compensation study. The compensation study, just some terminology that we use when we do a study, are comparator agencies, benchmark classification, and benefit data.
Clarification, that should have been
Yes.
taken out. We're not doing benefit data for this study.
Oh, sorry. No benefit data, so you can ignore that. So it will just be the comparator agencies and benchmark classifications. These are two factors that we need to determine prior to starting the compensation study. So comparator agencies are those agencies that the district compares themselves to externally. And then benchmark classifications, what that means is that of all the district classifications that exist, typically we will select about 60 to 65% of them to actually collect external market data on. So we're not going to collect data on all the classifications, and what we do is select about 60 to 65% of the total number of classifications. So in terms of the selection of comparator agencies, typically we look at these various factors, including the organizational type and structure, the population served, the services provided, the labor market, so where within the immediate geographic area, this being in the Bay Area is pretty unique in terms of certain factors like cost of living, median home price, all of that. And so, geographic proximity is definitely something that we take into consideration. And then from there, once we have the data collected, we look at it in various ways. We create some ratios, like number of employees to population served, budget size to number of employees, and we do a ranking, and from there we'll recommend about 12 agencies. 10 to 12 agencies is typically what we recommend that agencies use when they do a compensation study. So when we go out to collect the data, one of the things that we do at Coffin Associates that's a little bit different is we don't send out a questionnaire to the comparator agencies to fill out. We actually do all of the data collection and analysis ourselves. So we go out to the other agencies, we collect their classification descriptions, organization charts, any sort of MOUs, so agreements that they might have with their employee groups. We collect, allocation listings, salary information, and we do the job analysis and matching internally. So the same way we look at your positions during the classification study as a whole position approach, we do the same thing when we compare your classifications to other agencies' classifications. So we'll take a similar approach in looking at the whole position and not just going by job title. What we find is every agency is different. They'll have different titling conventions. So, an administrative assistant here might not be the same as an administrative assistant there. What we really want to know is understanding that body of work and making that whole position comparison. Yes.
Do you only look at nonprofit agencies in this case? Or what are examples of agencies that you would look at to compare with the district?
That's to be determined. Usually what probably other community college districts, in the local geographic area, or there might be certain other agencies that, the district finds that they either recruit from or lose employees to. So that would also be taken into consideration. What we found in the past or in our experience of doing these studies, we do work primarily with public sector agencies, so a lot of times they'll compare themselves to other public sector agencies. Private sector agencies, it can be challenging sometimes to get that data because they are not required to provide that information. But that's, again, something that we would need to work with the district to determine what those agencies are and whether or not they're just public sector or private. So once we have the data collected, what we typically do is we'll create a spreadsheet that shows each agency, the comparable match at each agency and their salary. And from there, we'll also do some calculations. We'll calculate the median of the market data. So all of the comparator agencies that had a match, the median of that salary data array. And then we'll also calculate the average. We'll also then show the percentage that the district is above or below that median and average. So as we mentioned previously, benchmark classifications usually represent about 60 to 65% of the total number of classifications that the district might have. So for that outstanding 40 to 35% of classifications, what we would need to do is still internally align them within the compensation structure. So what we would do is we would, again, use the whole position analysis and determine that internal equity and alignment. Also there are times when we don't have a sufficient number of matches for certain benchmark classifications, and again, we'll rely on internal equity principles to align them within the larger compensation structure. And just going back in terms of actually finding a sufficient number of matches, we need at least 4 matches to do those statistical calculations, just so that no one match has any undue influence on the data results. And then once we have the compensation structure set with all the classifications allocated within that structure, we'll work with the district in terms of moving forward with strategy and implementation. So just to reiterate some of the stakeholder touch points in the process, again, we try to be inclusive and include all stakeholders throughout the process. One is being the employee, or these orientation meetings, having employees come. The second being the PDQ process and the interviews. And again, as was mentioned earlier, we do highly encourage that all employees participate in the interview process. Just another means for your voice to be heard. Then employees, you'll have a chance again to review the draft classification descriptions, ask questions, provide feedback, and we'll respond to all the feedback and questions that we receive, and go ahead and incorporate changes and updates, or if there's questions, respond to those, or if we don't make an update, why we didn't make an update. So we'll actually write memos back to each employee who provides us feedback, and working through those final classification issues. In terms of the compensation study, again, just in terms of if you have a sense of some of the compensation study elements like comparator agencies, if you want to provide that feedback, like there's a certain agency you'd like to see the district use. I'm not guaranteeing that that agency will be used, but if you do have any input on that, we do encourage you to speak and give that information. And then just the compensation survey results in the final compensation structure, that will be for employees to review in terms of just understanding how the recommendations ultimately get made. So understanding the data, where it came from, and the basis for the recommendations.
Question.
Yes.
Good morning. I all of a sudden just realized that I don't know precisely the target group. Is it just ACE members? Is it CSEA, ACE, all classified?
It's just ACE.
Just ACE. Thank you.
Ed, any other questions or comments? Yes.
I knew it would be this side of the room.
Don't like to disappoint. So I realize this is a long process, and especially when you add the compensation component, because I am sure everybody is very interested in learning whether or not they're going to be making additional funds after working so long in their current positions at the levels that they've been at. What if you're close to retirement? Are you supposed to? And I'm not talking about myself because I'm not a part of this, but I am thinking of other people that I know that are close to retirement who are in ACE. Is there some form of protection for them if they retire before this compensation study is completed?
It's primarily a classification. I understand that, we all know that. The compensation piece will be negotiated with the district and the union. We're really not focused on that right now. So we're really trying to get your job descriptions updated to 2017 as opposed to 1993. So that's really our focus right now. The compensation piece, again, still has to be negotiated between the union and the district, so we're really not focusing on that right now.
So that's more what we should be talking to you about. Yeah, but it would be no different than, say, the COLA came up and we didn't get it till June, but they retired in January. They don't get it.
Right. So if a person leaves. Right.
There, that's the answer.
Yeah.
Hi. Can you speak a little bit more to how you would address, after getting the PDQs, reviewing them, interviewing employees to gather information, if you do find that there are discrepancies around, let's say, the level of work reported by an employee versus the level of work a supervisor might, describe the employee doing, how you would go about resolving those discrepancies. In the past, I've applied for reclassification, and interviews were done separately, but there was never an opportunity for everybody to get together in one room and really kind of talk through things and get the opportunity to really kind of get an accurate picture of what work employees are really doing.
Sure. So in terms of if there is that discrepancy, we'll try to get that addressed. You know, we do hold interviews separate, so an employee, a supervisor wouldn't be in the interview with their employees. So that's our process as well. But we would, you know, follow up on those types of questions that came up once we read through the PDQ form that the employee completed in the supervisor review. If in terms of, you know, further discrepancies or differences in terms of the work, if there's, you know, the supervisor thinks one thing and the employee, we do encourage that, you know, as employees and supervisors, you meet on your own outside of this process to discuss that. But for us, you know, this is the work that we do, so it's not uncommon to have that difference. But we will, you know, we have experience in understanding what the work is and should be, and so we'll make that recommendation. But if there's further discrepancies, we do encourage that, you know, the employees and supervisors have that conversation, but outside of this process.
And is there equal weight given to?
Yeah, so we are, you know, we're hired to be the objective party, you know, and come in and listen to both sides and make that determination of what the leveling of that work and what the appropriate classification should be.
Yeah, I think primarily, I mean, you know, we try and reconcile a variety of pieces of information that we get through this whole process and try and find out, you know, come to our own conclusions about what appears to be the essence of the job. You know, using information from you, supervisor information, you know, information that we have collected over the years, and you know, we bring that information together. Where we do see discrepancies, we have a non-confrontational process for you know, reconciling some of those differences. But you know, at the end of the day, we make every effort to reconcile all that information so that, you know, when you look at the job information, when your supervisor looks at the job information, you both say, yeah, this appears to be a pretty accurate reflection of the work that you do. And really the vast majority of the times, we don't see it becoming a problem. We're able to do that reconciliation.
I had another question regarding, I guess, the different campuses. Like, for example, a lot of it is anecdotal type of observations that some departments have maybe one or two people, and the other comparative department at another campus, same district, might have multiple people working with. Do you know in your statistical analysis if that will be something that would be recommended or addressed or brought in comparative mode to say, hey, you know, maybe if you're going to have this type of service, you know, like perhaps it should be, you know, like a few more people should be working, or a few less people should be working at that particular department.
So, you know, one of the things that the study we're not here to do is recommend staffing levels. So we wouldn't be making that recommendation in terms of the number of staff. In terms of just reconciling differences that might be based on the location or the college that you're at, you know, this is a district-wide study, so we're going to be looking at it holistically, organization-wide. So hopefully some of those differences will surface, and we can address those and reconcile those. But in terms of staffing, we're not here to make those. That won't be part of this study.
Hi, I have a question on the interview process. I was wondering if the interview is going to be tape recorded or transcribed, and if it can be added to the PDQ for documentation to Human Resources. Just because if a staff member doesn't have 2 hours to complete the form or forgets or new job duties are added, can that be documented from the interview process?
So typically the interview process, if you want to, you can bring in, you know, to take notes. We take notes as well for ourselves, for our documentation purposes, to have that information, documented what we spoke about during the interviews. We typically don't record the interviews, but in terms of the notes that we take, we can work that out with the district in terms of providing the notes that we take during those interviews.
More of a comment. As an administrator, for the employees to do the PDQ, I think it's critical. You may not get down every detail because you've forgotten, but I hope that there's no reason that everyone in this room doesn't do a PDQ, because that's where they're getting the information from. If you don't do it, you can't complain. Well, you can.
He said it.
By the way, one hint to help you with this. I don't know about you, but if I were to sit down today and to try and write down, all aspects of my job and what I do and so on, I would probably sit there with a blank look on my face, and I'd have a real tough time getting going on it. It really helps a lot if you do this over a period of time and kind of take it in chunks. Go in, take a look at the form, get started on it. Maybe give yourself 20 minutes, and then feel free to log off. And tomorrow, go ahead and put a little more time on it. Do it a bit over time, and feel free also to have a piece of paper around. A notebook or something where you write things down as they kind of pop into your head, because there's a lot of stuff that you do that you're not going to be able to think of while you're sitting there looking at the screen, and it's going to come to you a little bit later, a couple of days later or later in the day or something like that. And to really capture these things, you need to kind of take it over a period of time. If you wait till the last day to get this thing in, it's going to be really incomplete. And it's not going to be the best job. So we really encourage you to get started early and to pick it up often, and put stuff in there over a period of time. That'll help you out a lot. And there was a question, I think, over on this side.
Well, it was kind of that, what you just talked about.
Okay.
Because I was thinking maybe it would be useful to just, when we have moments of free time, to just do brainstorming, bullets, just put bullets of what your duties are as you're maybe doing them, so you don't forget them. Save that, and then you can draw from that when you're filling out the
Absolutely.
Listening to some of the comments, this is a non-confrontational process. Hopefully the whole idea is to be able to upgrade positions, make them 2017, as what things are reflective of what you're doing now. The union and management are actually working together to try to make this happen for you. These people just didn't come out of nowhere. They had to compete for the job. We interviewed many consultants. We've picked them because we believe that they're going to do the best job in an impartial way, okay? So they need your data. They need your information as accurately as possible, and they will take that data and use their professionalism to create what they believe is an appropriate classification system for 2017. That's what we're here to do. We're not here to try to take away rights or to denigrate anybody's position. We're here to try to make everything a little current, okay? So please, just look at this with an open mind, fill out your forms as accurately as you can. If you miss something, you can always get a hold of Chris or myself or somebody to say, hey, I didn't do this, I need to add this in. We'll make sure you get hooked up with the consultants, and let's just make this a positive experience as we can, okay?
Any other questions? So my reminders are, deadline to get your PDQs in are February 24th. You know me, you know I will hound you to get it done. I will also tell you that I am the world's best procrastinator, so do not be like me and wait till the last minute. It will not end well. Really, this is about the work that you do today. So be conscious of the work that you're doing and put this in and fill out the PDQs, and then we negotiate from there what all of that looks like. And as Bradley already stated, at the very end, it doesn't just happen. I still have to bring it back to you, our members, to vote to approve or not approve this process. Our hope is the more collaborative and transparent we can be up front about what our goals are, and I've been very clear about what those goals are, up to date job descriptions, career pathways. Do they align with what the market is doing? I've been very clear all along about what those goals are. Doesn't mean we're going to meet them all. It means that those what our goals are. We're going to try really hard to do it, but I can't do it if you don't participate. So I'm glad that you came. I've got 2 more sessions. Hopefully more will come. Encourage your colleagues to fill it out. I'm going to send the PDQ to everybody at the end of the day with very specific instructions about what you're to do, where you can find more information, who you can call for help if you need help filling it out. I will send all of that out to you later on today. But until then, we just need to sort of go with the flow for a little bit. And I really appreciate your time, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you.